Congratulations, Simon Bucknall, on winning the District 91 International Speech Contest final. I understand this is your third time of winning this particular competition. How does that feel?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And the simple answer is every bit as intense as previously. It doesn't get any less intense, both actually giving the speech, preparing for the contest, and then the feelings afterwards. And I'm sure the same is true for all the speakers. But it's a fab feeling. But any speaker will say that the most important thing is, do you feel you gave the speech that you came to give?
And do you feel that you did?
I do.
Today?
Yeah. It was a real feeling of relief actually on sitting down, because it's just 7 minutes. It's so forensic and tightly, there's such tight boundaries in terms of timing. So, and you can never be quite sure exactly how it's going to work out. But to sit down after having spoken and just think, yeah, do you know what, that's as good as it can be for me on this day. It's a good feeling, and then the results, well, let's just see.
Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit around the 3 victories you've had before and your trip to the World Championship semi-finals.
Well, I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is the value of working on a speech and then crafting it and taking on board feedback and improving, because in competing within Toastmasters, what's known as a district level, or in other words round 4, never mind round 5, and for anyone who reaches the world final, round 6, you're taking a speech through a whole series of rounds in front of audiences, and as a result the speech changes. And this year it's true as in previous years, although I've not entered the competition for a little while, but this year certainly the speech message has stayed the same throughout, but the actual speech itself has changed a great deal. I listened to the audio of my club level contest from February, and it's very, very different from where the speech is at now.
Definitely. And on that note, how do you go about constructing a speech in terms of finding that topic? Because I know a lot of our Toastmasters that is a question that commonly comes up.
Yes. I think the simple answer to that is that you can start in one of 2 places. Either you start with a particular message or idea that you care about, and then you look for ways in which to bring that to life in the form of stories and supporting illustrations and arguments. The other way of doing it is you start with a story that for whatever reason has, or an experience that has had a big impact on you, and it might be something quite trivial and everyday. It doesn't have to be some big drama, but you identify a story that is meaningful, and then from that start to finesse what a potential message might be that other people can relate to. So I think either of those works out for developing a speech, and over the years with various sessions and speeches that I've developed, sometimes it's kicked off with a story and sometimes it's kicked off with a message. As far as this year was concerned, I did have in my head the idea that I wanted to say something about, or attempt a speech on the topic of honesty. I just hadn't quite figured out in my mind how I was going to best do that.
Understand. And then around your rehearsal technique, the practice that goes in, do you have a methodology that you use, or over the years have you learnt from your past experiences? How do you go about practicing? It's
a subjective area. Different things work for different people. I think the big challenge with rehearsal is to find a way to ensure that when you actually deliver the speech that it feels and is real, rather than it coming across as technique-y. And if I look at people, in particular the word of stand-up comedy, for example, I'm a huge admirer of stand-up comics because it comes across as so natural and authentic and perhaps impromptu, and yet, from what I can understand of the profession, lots of work has gone into the honing of that. So I think with the rehearsal, what I find it useful to do is if I'm going to commit to actually writing a script, and that's not always necessary. With contest speeches, I personally do draft a script, but in other talks, I won't necessarily always do a script. There's no rule that says you have to have a script. But the test is, in the practice, is to continually run through it out loud, perhaps even in conversation with somebody else, so that you get a sense for how it sounds and whether it feels right. Because what we write, tap, 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 or whether it's with a pen and paper, that mode is quite different from actually how we speak. And very often, certainly if I think in my own early drafts of speeches, it reads okay, but then it's said out loud, and I think, oh, that doesn't sound like me, actually. So working that through, I find, is a really important part of the preparation.
Absolutely. And in terms of the authenticity, you mentioned that when you've rehearsed it so many times, how do you keep that authenticity when you go up on stage?
I think this is often asked about, doesn't it get stale? Well, actually, if you do care about the message, care about the stories that you're using, first of all, why would you get tired of it? As an English speaker, I use the word the a lot. I use the word Freya a lot. It's the name of my daughter. I don't get tired of using either of those words. Although sometimes if I'm being driven bonkers by my children, I think maybe... because it's part of being in the moment. So I think that's the first thing. This idea that just because you're familiar with something, why should it get boring? People who love football and watching football, they just get... oh, well, it's another football match. Because it's always different. And then the second part of that, I think, is being present with in the moment and remembering that for the audience, chances are for the majority of people, that they haven't heard it before. And it's new and it's fresh. And even if they have heard it before, they'll almost always access or respond to it in a slightly different way. I can think of speakers who have conveyed fabulous stories, and I've heard it more than once, and I continue to enjoy it. It's like a favourite TV programme, and it's a slightly different experience each time. So I think being present in that moment is really, really important, because that's what helps keep it real.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The speech may be something that is you've worked on a lot, but that moment is always unique.
Agree. And talk to me a little bit around nerves, fear. That's a common challenge that we face, particularly in a contest environment. How do you deal with nerves? What advice could you give to newer Toastmasters thinking about stepping up but perhaps being a bit cautious?
I think the first point is a mindset point, which is to recognise nerves or symptoms of nerves for what they are, which is it's adrenaline. Call it nervousness, but it's not. It's actually symptoms of adrenaline, when the heart pounding or the face going red or the mind racing or the tingles in the hands, sweaty palms, whatever it is. All those things are symptoms of adrenaline. And I think as soon as you separate out, and this is not playing smoke and mirrors, it's just true, as soon as you separate out the symptoms and say, right, these are symptoms of adrenaline, I'm allowed to experience that. It's so important to give yourself permission to experience the adrenaline, rather than, at least in my view, trying to fake them out somehow. And say, right, that's symptoms of adrenaline, that's okay. So you then take responsibility for how you're responding to your physical feelings. I felt, boy, did I feel adrenaline this afternoon in the contest. Yeah, I've spent thousands of hours thinking about working on public speaking. Trust me, that sense of adrenaline doesn't go away. It might feel a bit different or a bit lower than perhaps years ago when I first started out. So, but it's so important that to acknowledge in your own head what that quote-unquote nervousness really is. And the second thing then is that, for me, the single most helpful thing after that, practically, that helps, is a combination of movement, actually walking around, getting some exercise, walk around the block to help channel that adrenaline, channel that energy, and good quality breathing, because that does also help to settle. The panic breath is well, that starts to happen when we slip into nervousness mode, and just remembering to take some slow, deep breaths helps to just manage those symptoms better. That's
good advice. And I wanted to ask you as a follow-up around vocal variety. And do you do any warm-ups? You've got a great voice. Do you do any warm-ups before you enter a contest to rehearse your voice, get it ready, or...?
Not in a formal way. I have a very good friend who's a singer, and we shared a flat together years ago, and he absolutely would be doing vocal exercises, and whether it was in the shower or making a cup of tea or whatever. For me, I find it really helpful to have conversations with people beforehand. So just as I normally would, I'm not doing anything special, because it's just good in terms of the energy. It's a bit like gentle stretching and going for a jog, just to chat to people rather than sitting in silence, worrying with the headphones on. And then the other thing also is then to be careful about what you drink. So water doesn't really help with dry mouth, for example. I personally don't get it that much, but I know some people do. Something sweet is more helpful. So things like fruit juice or peppermint tea. I had a peppermint tea with a couple of sugar lumps today. Much, much better to drink than, say, milk or anything milk-based, because then there's just a risk of that being unhelpful for the vocal cords.
And I'm guessing caffeine is off the menu as well on a day of a big contest?
Personally, for me, yes. But I do quite a lot of, I've done quite a lot of work over the years with wedding speakers, and it often crops up from wedding speakers, should I have a drink or not? Well, if you want to have a drink, but actually alcohol very quickly becomes a hindrance, although I think some people think, it'll be really helpful. In my experience, not the case.
Nothing worse than a drunk speaker at a district final.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty confident everyone was sober today.
I hope so. I think you're right. So this is a slightly, I guess, a bit more of a controversial question. The speech that you gave today, that you've been honing for some time, we're always critical of our own performances. Is there anything you would have done differently today? Or could you say you were completely content with the performance?
I was really happy with what I delivered, because it just felt right. I've spent a lot of time preparing it to try to ensure that everything in the speech counts for the audience, and that's of course at the whole heart of speech preparation. What are you wanting to achieve for the audience? And spent a lot of time. It's been through, say, a number of rounds already, so I was very clear in my own mind of what I felt was most important to give the best chance of the audience responding in the way that I hoped. And I knew that if I missed out a section, for example, then that would be a shame. So I came away feeling, that it went as I hoped it would do.
Yes.
But actually, rather than that being word perfect, there were bits that I changed, and there was a slip where actually, well, it was half intended, but I think the audience thought it was a genuine mistake. And I thought, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it felt good. I think you can always sense that on stage, whether a speaker really actually feels what they're saying. And for me, that's what it's about. And if that means that there are various slips, well, who cares? I've looked at lots of speeches, and speeches absolutely at world final level, many of the best speeches, there's always a quote-unquote mistake in there. It's definitely not about being perfect.
Absolutely. And in terms of keeping, you mentioned authenticity before, and in keeping with that, line learning. This is another challenge that we face, a reason why people don't necessarily want to put themselves forward for a contest, because they have to remember the lines. They become obsessed with learning the speech word for word perfectly. Yeah. You mentioned that you had kind of veered off that a little bit today. How do you talk to me about how you go about doing that?
The word learning or memorising, I think, is a really dangerous one. I know this is a conversation I've had with many speakers over the years, that actually, rather than, as soon as you think of it as trying to learn or memorise the lines, your mental focus comes into thinking about what the next line is. Right now, for example, as you and I both know, there is no script for this conversation, and you just trust yourself to find what's right. I like to think of it with a speech. A speech really works when it comes across as how you would hope a really cracking conversation would go, where you're the one speaking for a few minutes. But of course the audience is also speaking, because they respond and there's pauses and there might be a laugh, and that's the audience talking back. Yeah. But and that is where I think the speech writing and crafting comes in, and why it's so important to actually hear the speech out loud and think, does that actually sound right? So and actually I know in some cases where people have found it helpful to deliver a speech without any kind of script, and then to transcribe what they said. So they take what they said first and make that the hero, and then figure out, well, what was that, so that they can then replicate it. Because often great stuff happens without it having been planned.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, a very neat way in which to build and develop a speech, is to throw away the script, just go for it, record it, and then take the bits that work best.
Absolutely, and that's great advice to some newer members, younger members looking to enter.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the trick is for Toastmasters who are watching this is to really make the most of the manual speeches, and also topics, of course. But just taking manual speeches as an example, the real tragedy, I think, with manual speeches is when a speech is given once, you get great feedback, and then you move on to the next manual speech, different topic, and that speech just freezes at ground floor level. And I always remember Darren LaCroix, the 2001 world champion of public speaking, saying, every single one of you has the ability to craft a world-class speech. You just may not have finished writing it yet. And that process of honing over time, I think, is one of the big benefits of contests. And I think we always have an opportunity as speakers to do the same with manuals, to say, oh, that bit worked. And then to look for opportunities to develop that and to reuse it. Yes. Like a good chef. You wouldn't expect a really good chef to be putting together a recipe for a dish on the day. You'd hope that he or she had done it before.
You absolutely would.
Otherwise, you're going to be a bit of a fool paying money for a chef who's just improvising.
Exactly. No, I completely agree with you. I'd love to talk a little bit around the International Speech Contest as a whole, because my understanding is that the speech contest has evolved quite a lot in the last 30, 40 years. It started off, perhaps in the 80s, where you have a speaker that puts a very solid argument together, almost more of a political speech. And over the years, it's become very much more about the self, about storytelling, perhaps even, if I could say this, going a little bit over the top in some of the speeches into almost a drama capacity. And looking forward to the speech you're about to write for the World Championships of Public Speaking, I wondered whether that is important to you in keeping with the theme of over-dramatising, or how you're planning to to work on that?
Yeah, I think for me the most important principles for the speech, whether it's in the World Championships or otherwise, is for it to be sincere, for it to be real. It may or may not be something that's been really worked through. But I think in terms of the end, so that's really important to me. And if it doesn't feel right to do a certain gesture, then I won't do it. And actually, I do very little work on gestures in speech making. I think it's quite risky, personally. I think if you just let go, then the body language will happen, and then you start to notice actually how you're behaving without having given it much conscious thought. Far better that than trying to code book your way into having all exactly the right kind of gestures. Personally, that's my view.
Yes.
I think as far as the energy is concerned, one of the tensions, I think, is that certainly with a world final, and I've seen a couple of world finals as an audience member over the years, it's 2,000 plus people, 2,500 people even, in a room, and it's a big room. That's a big space to fill. And if you were to sit on the front row close to the speaker, it's going to feel a bit over the top because you're at row 1. For the person sitting in row 50, it feels about right. But of course, then when you watch those speeches on TV or YouTube, then you're seeing it through a much more intimate medium, and the speeches can feel quite different than they felt in the hall.
Yes.
So I think that's a factor to consider, I think, and it can sometimes result in speeches coming across rather differently than they may have done at the time.
Yes, I think that's a very fair point. Simon, the United Kingdom has never won the World Championships of Public Speaking, which seems surreal given the talent we have and the fact that we have some of the most famous and the best writers in the world that we can count upon. Why do you think that is? And second to that, is this the year that changes?
I have no idea. How's that for an answer? I don't know. I don't know. It's. I think that the public speaking competition is a very unusual environment, and it's actually a very artificial environment for speaking. I've said this before in talks. It's a bit like a laboratory. It's an amazing environment in which to hone skills and to try things out and to finesse the craft of seeking maximum impact in a short period of time. But it is an artificial construct, 7 minutes with lights and judges, and of course the judging's always subjective. And from the UK from Britain and from Ireland until recently, it was just the one speaker each year going into the world finals. One of 80 plus speakers, in the semi-finals. There's a lot of speakers.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Maybe it's a numbers game. I don't know. But it's an artificial environment, and it's a brilliant one. I wouldn't have entered again this year if I didn't think that was the case. But I don't think you can read too much into how well is a particular nation doing. I mean, the winner a few years back, I can remember. Well, I remember seeing the year when I was in Phoenix, seeing a speaker from Calcutta win, Vikas Jingran. I've seen a speaker from Bulgaria win, a speaker from Saudi, and fantastic speakers. I don't know if nationality is particularly a factor.
Okay.
I'd like to think that nationality isn't a factor.
Let's
at least.
hope. And do you have any, this is the final question, do you have any thoughts in the back of your mind around what you might do? Anything you can let us in on at this point for the World Championship speech, I mean? Well,
the next round in Vancouver will be the semi-finals, and at least as I understand it, you can use the district winning speech if you wish. And at this point, I feel very good about the speech. I care about it deeply, and so my first thought is that I would likely use that. And it's a few months away, but beyond that, if indeed I get that far, I have an open mind. But what I do know is that the process of developing a speech from scratch to world-class level takes a lot of work. And so one decision I had to make is whether or not to draw on some material or ideas from previous years, either inside Toastmasters or outside, which could be developed in preparation for a speech, as opposed to preparing something literally from ground zero.
Absolutely, it makes perfect sense. And we wish you all the best of luck for the World Championships. I'm sure you'll do us proud. Congratulations once again on your 3rd district championship. That's incredible work, and it's been a pleasure to meet you.
Well, likewise, Melissa. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Simon.